we move into the quarterfinals of the World Cup, and now we really have battles of the big beasts, and I'm going to take you through one of those. This is the second classical game between Liren from China and Alexander Grischuk from Russia, both vying to win the big prize here, a ticket through to the candidates. So this is game number 2, and well, their first game was actually very interesting, with Ding sacrificing exchange, very enterprising game. And well, Grischuk said afterwards somehow he was very impressed by Ding's play, but that meant nothing going into game 2, what would happen here. So it's a slightly unusual opening from Grischuk. Instead of playing the normal d5 or perhaps c6, he's gone for bishop c5 at a very early stage. Now you might think that knight c3 was the normal move here, but keeping your options open to perhaps play e3 and d4, but Ding just went for d3. So this really does look like a reverse Sicilian, particularly after Grischuk plays d5, so now we've transposed really into a Sicilian but with reversed colours. So the knight on d5 is attacked, and that goes back to b6. So we have, a kind of classical dragon, except the bishop has come to c5 rather than the normal e7. I mean, it's slightly out on a limb on c5, but this kind of thing has been played fairly recently. Not in exactly this position. And of course, white wants to expand with b4, so a5. And previously we've seen bishop e3 here, but Ding preferred not to damage his structure. Knight a4. A standard move, and so black exchanges, the queen comes to an active position. And Grischuk went in with knight d4. Before that knight can kind of get fixed on the c file before a rook comes there. And knight d4 looks pretty normal, to occupy the outpost, and Ding exchanged. Now this is a big decision from Grischuk. Do you recapture with the bishop or the pawn? I think both are reasonable. If you recapture with the pawn, then there is perhaps potential later to attack the pawn on e2. But then again, white has possibilities to expand on the queen side. In any case, Grischuk went for bishop takes d4 after very little thought. And c6, so that closes the diagonal and stops any ideas of an attack on the c file. So we've ended up in a pretty regular position. Of course, that pawn here can't be taken on b2 because rook a2 would win the piece, so the bishop goes back. So it's a very regular position we have here, actually. No huge complications, no great interaction between the pieces. And, when I was watching this, I was actually thinking this could fizzle to a draw pretty quickly. So, for example, after queen takes d3, bishop e5. Well, I slightly prefer white's pieces. The bishops are somehow more active than black's, but it doesn't look too awful somehow for black. But Grischuk didn't want to exchange. He played rook e8. I mean, perhaps he just didn't want to be slightly worse in that position. Instead, just protected his e-pawn. Whoops, not with the queen, with the rook. Rook d1. I'd say the only thing about this position that is just a little bit more comfortable for white is that he can choose when to make a pawn break. He can choose whether to advance with b4, b5, or perhaps break with d4, whereas black doesn't actually have that luxury. That's a difference between the two sides. So not that these pawn breaks are in any way decisive or leading to some kind of advantage, but white can choose the moment when to break. So for the moment, both sides just improving their position a little bit and just waiting. And the rook coming to d2. Now, I don't think that was with the idea of doubling, but it actually makes room for the queen to come back sometimes, as we'll see in a second. So here is where Ding chooses to break. And instead of b4, b5, he goes for d4. And I think the reason he chose it here is because if the pawn comes to e4, then the queen can come back. That steps out of the line of the bishop. And maybe b4, b5 again, but also d5 becomes a possibility. And that certainly does look quite nice for white, because that would open up this diagonal. The bishop certainly looks great on c3. White's rooks are more active than black's. And if bishop e6, which of course that's what black wants, if black can establish that bind in the middle, then black is doing well. But in this case, the centre pawn would be exchanged off. I mean, this is still not completely clear actually, but structurally white is better with the greater number of pawns in the centre. So d4, an important break. Of course, that shouldn't be played by black, threatening mate and threatening the bishop. So coming back to this position, c5 played by Grischuk, attacking the queen. So this introduces some exchanges in the position. Now, again, this would really, I think, if black exchanges on d4, this would unleash white's pieces actually. You can see that white's rooks are better coordinated than black's, and also white's bishops are far better than black's bishops. So understandably, Grischuk chose to try to keep the position closed. I think this is correct. But white's pieces are definitely better than black's. Just a little bit. You know, these bishops are stronger than black's bishops. And there is sometimes potential to advance here. Then again, black can straighten out pieces as well. Rook d1 played. Yeah, rooks weren't doing that much when they're split. And this one is ready to come to e1. And now Grischuk exchanged on e1. Maybe that was a little bit rushed. Perhaps simply queen c7 here, just to connect the rooks. But instead he exchanged and then played queen c7. Now how can white improve the position? Well, d5 is of course a move that we should always keep in mind, because it opens up this diagonal for the bishop. But it would block in this one. So probably premature. So how can white improve the position? Well, Ding decides to just press on the king side a little bit. There's no need to rush in the centre. So at some moment it might be nice to cramp black further with h5. It also takes that pawn away from that bishop as well. So rook e8 played by Grischuk. Well, white certainly has a little bit of initiative after this. Rook d8 might have been a better move, but it's certainly more pleasant for white to play this position. Bishop d5, looking at two sensitive spots in black's camp. And again, rook d8 could be played, just avoiding the exchange, but white is better in this position after h5. So Grischuk exchanged, and I think here is actually a key moment in the game. Grischuk played bishop e6 here to exchange pieces, which is understandable. But it might have been better to do something else here. I mean, one possibility is bishop b4 to exchange off bishops. Now, this gives up a pawn. So I can understand why Grischuk would be reluctant to play like this. But actually it gives some clarity to the position. And after bishop e6, well, white has to exchange queens. And this is not such an easy position to win. Of course, during a game it would be very difficult to go into this with black. You know that you have no winning chances whatsoever. And white has a clear extra pawn. But these kind of bishop end games can be sometimes very hard to win if black, for example, blockades with the king in the middle of the board. White is going to make no progress on the king side, where black has a nice blockade. So that would be a possibility, but hard to compromise like that. Another idea is to play the queen back to c8, and then to play, if I can make the move, that'd be good, queen to e8, so giving up that pawn temporarily, but you can see two pieces are hit there. White doesn't have to do that, of course. So black did have options here, but Grischuk running rather short of time. Ding was about a half an hour ahead on the clock, and Grischuk was down to a couple of minutes by this point. So Grischuk decided to exchange, or offer the exchange, and Ding went in for it. And Ding had judged this position very well. This is a very important moment. Ding very quickly played queen e4 here. Excellent move. If he plays bishop c3, just bringing the bishop back into play, then black is absolutely fine. Once that queen reaches d5, these points are protected. The d pawn is blockaded. Black has no difficulties. Queen e4 is a really important move, preventing black's queen coming to c6, attacking the e-pawn as well. And now Ding said after the game he wasn't sure what was better, whether he should play d5 or bishop c3. He chose bishop c3. I don't think it makes much difference. Both moves are very strong. Bishop f8. Bishop comes back to defend that pawn, and Ding opens the position with d5. And now Grischuk has enormous problems. If the pawns are exchanged, then bishop d4. And I think this position highlights black's problems here. Basically, black has three weaknesses. g7, attacked by the bishop. c4, a loose pawn attacked by the queen. And also b6, attacked by this bishop. You could also include black's king as a loose piece as well, because it's vulnerable to checks. So after d5, Grischuk played queen d6, but those weaknesses haven't gone away. Ding exchanged. And queen b7 check. Bishop d4, attacking the pawn on b6. And this is impossible for black to hold it all together. I mean, if king h7, then queen takes b6. Well, this should be basically a technical win. If queen f5, this is the game. King h2 is an excellent move, actually. Just stepping away from the back rank, and also, yeah, important, it doesn't come to this diagonal because king could be vulnerable to checks there. Grischuk played queen c2. Once again, king h7, well, that can just be taken. Let's just have a quick look at that. If king h7, I mean, there's more than one way to win this position. But let's just see this. Queen takes pawn. Bishop c3. Now, again, it's probably rushing it to exchange here, but queen b7 is a good move. So that just keeps tabs on the pawn on g7, and also a5 is also still vulnerable. And this, well, it should be a technical win. Still some work to do there. Another possibility after king h7 is bishop takes b6. And if bishop c5, well, in fact, you don't have to exchange bishops. The queen and pawn endgame could be very tricky, but instead take here. Now this looks crazy to give up pawn on f2, but actually the queen comes back and the bishop comes here. And in fact, this looks excellent for white. In fact, there are still problems here for black. The king should be safe here, and yeah, black should lose that position. But king h7 might be a better try for black. There are still technical difficulties, as you can see there. Queen c2 played, a check, and now Ding switches to the attack on g7. Obviously the bishop is attacked as well. So bishop can't move because of queen takes g7 mate, and if queen d3, well, this is the game. What a beautiful piece, anchored by the pawn on b2. This is one of the major themes in this game, and well, obviously black had to protect the bishop, and that means this c-pawn is on prise. And here the time control had passed. Grischuk had made the time control without losing on time, but well, he didn't bother playing this position on. He realized his task would be hopeless. Still a few technical difficulties, but basically Ding has captured that pawn and still has these two to attack, so it is definitely winning. Let me give you a little taste of what could happen. Let's say bishop e7, queen b5 attacks the pawn, black covers, now the queen goes in, so you can see how black is getting hit all over the place here. And when the bishop comes out, now we can take this. Okay, black is 2 pawns down at the moment, and if bishop takes, okay, if that's taken, then watch out for this. But queen b5 will take another one. Now white is only a pawn up, only 1 pawn up, but this looks absolutely disastrous for black. It's important that white's king is completely safe here, so basically the queen and bishop can concentrate on shepherding the a-pawn home. Well, after the game, Grischuk said to Ding, well, he was wondering where he went wrong. And I can understand why Grischuk said that, because, you know, Grischuk's opening was okay. In the early middle game, yes, Ding had a few more options with these pawn breaks, but actually there didn't seem to be a huge amount wrong with Grischuk's position. But somehow, you know, when they reached here, it was clear that really only Ding could make progress here. And optically black looked okay, but it was extraordinary how quickly it went downhill for Grischuk, you know, around about this position, and suddenly, you know, he's worse and has to choose between, you know, 2 bad endgames. So I think Ding proved that, you know, his understanding of these positions was absolutely superb, and he goes through to the semi-final. Now, it could be that he will face his compatriot Yu Yangyi in the next round, but Yu goes into the tie breaks, but we'll see. Could be very, very interesting semi-final between two Chinese players, but we're not there yet. Thanks very much for watching. Remember, do comment, like, share and subscribe, and if you'd like to support the channel, then do check out the links to PayPal and also patreon.com/PowerPlayChess. Thanks for watching.